Hello, and welcome back. 'Tis I, your favorite author tuber, Julian Greystoke. You may know me as a self-published author and also a developmental editor. But also, I have a Patreon. And over on Patreon, at a certain level, you can boss me around. And one of my patrons took advantage of this and requested that I make this video that I am making here today. So thank you to that patron for the suggestion. Many of you may know, if you're familiar with my channel, that one of the ways that I like to approach world building, in fact, one of my main ways to approach world building within my own writing, is actually through culture building. Because as you build cultures, that really helps shape a lot of your world building. And obviously, if you've seen the title of this video, that is exactly what this patron requested. Now, I have quite a few notes here, and they are kind of all over the place because I just wrote them down as I thought of them. So these are just going to be Julian's tips for culture building. This will not be an exhaustive list. There are definitely going to be other things that you could do that maybe didn't make it onto this list. So feel free to put those in the comments below. And also, if these seem kind of random and all over the place, they are. Thanks for noticing. Also, you'll probably not be able to take every single piece of advice in this video, and that's normal and fine. If you hear something that resonates with you, grab it and run. And if you hear something that you're like, oh, that's really not going to work for my story, then obviously ignore it. Because tips are just tips, and advice is just advice, not hard and fast rules.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
World building through culture building. This is mostly, obviously, for people who are writing not contemporary fiction, not stuff that is set in the real world. We're talking mostly here today fantasy, we're talking sci-fi. But even so, you can include some of these details even if you are writing in the real world. If you are, say, writing a fictional town that doesn't exist in the real world, there could still be some culture building to be done within that town, and also cultural considerations to be done surrounding that by just like researching the culture of the area that you are setting your book in, which is something that I feel like a lot of people neglect to do, especially if they're writing a book that is set somewhere that that person has never lived. So my advice, it begins thusly. Start small and work your way outward. So we're going to start very small with our culture building. We're going to start with the main character's family. What's the culture of the main character's family? Then we're going to move out from there, immediate surroundings. So what is their town or village like? Or colony if this is sci-fi. Then we're going to go bigger. What is the culture of their kingdom/country? So start very small and move up, because there are cultures in all of those spheres and they are interconnected but often not completely the same. What you want to avoid is monocultures, and you see it a lot in sci-fi, but you also do see it quite a bit in fantasy, where the main characters go to, say, a new country and everyone in that country have like one thing. This is their hat, their culture of hats, and their hat is this, like, oh, let's say that they're nomads. Our culture is nomads. Our entire identity is nomads. We've got nothing else going on. What you want to avoid is that, because no matter where you go in the world, even if there are things that are very culturally ingrained and important to these cultures, how many times can I say cultures in one video until it loses its meaning? But anyway, there will be important things to every culture, but there is no such thing as a monoculture that is all just one thing and nothing else. And the larger you go, like city, kingdom, country, the larger you go, the less of that monoculture you're gonna see. Like maybe you could have a town that's kind of all about one thing, but you get bigger than that and it feels deeply unrealistic to have people who are all about one thing. And also remember that smaller groups form cultures. We've all been in our various societies, whether it be gaming groups at the local game store or a book club, or heck, your writers group. They all have different cultures. You can go from one writers group to another writers group and the culture is going to be very different. So remember that even small groups form sort of a culture of their own. And there are cultures within cultures. So for example, queer culture. There are things within queer culture that are within the culture of our area, it is a nesting doll of cultures, which can be intimidating, but that's why I say start small and work outward. Because like if you try to start big, it's going to get really intimidating really fast. Next, I have that environments shape culture. This is especially true for when you're trying to do your town or your country, your kingdom, your space colony. So is it cold or hot? Is there water nearby? Is there a forest? Is there a desert? What's the trade and population like? Is there a lot of population and do they trade with the outside world? Or is there a very small population and they remain pretty insulated and really only provide for themselves with what they can obtain from the land that they have? And then, of course, farming. What's the farming situation like? Or do they have to trade a lot to get the necessities? And also movement or staying put. Are they very stationary or do they pick up their whole city and move from time to time? How far do they spread? Like how far do they go for hunting or foraging? How far are they willing to travel to get what they need from the environment? Next, I have religion, and religion is a huge part of cultures, and I have a whole video all about building religion that I'm going to refer you to rather than trying to lump it here into this video. So when you're finished watching this one, you can go over and learn about my tips for building religion within your society, because religion can be really important. And also remember that multiple cultures may have different religions and even multiple religions within the same culture. Then of course we have history. What has happened to your culture historically? Where were they before the thing happened and where are they now because of the thing that happened? For example, was there a war, a famine, a natural disaster? Or have they been living a long span of wealth and prosperity? Those things would make for very different attitudes within the culture. A poor and starving culture is going to have a lot of different thoughts, feelings, actions versus one that has been living comfortably for a long time. Then we have thinking about old and new cultures and how they may clash, because culture is always changing and growing. So something to think about is your main character part of an old culture or a new culture? Are they leading the charge of the new culture? For example, has their little city always valued the ancient rules, but those ancient rules just don't seem to be applying anymore for plot reasons that your story will further expound upon? And how does that new culture clash with the old? How are the young people handling the world differently from the way that the elders have been handling it? And of course, something that's always big in cultures is race and class. Now, do be extremely careful when you're writing about race especially, but also you want to be delicate about class. But like, definitely watch out for any one-to-one comparisons with things that have happened in our world, unless you are fully prepared to like do your due diligence about that and not just like plop it into your book. But yes, in many places, race and class in society, I love to explore classism personally. Like, it's really interesting to explore. But those things can factor in and also have their own cultures within a culture to do with that. Like, the lower class will have a different culture from the higher class just within your city alone. Again, I know this seems very intimidating, but like I said, start small, work out. And as I've often said with world building, and you don't have to do it my way, of course, but my way is that if my characters don't know about it, interact with it, or care about it, that's world building that I don't necessarily have to put on the page, and probably shouldn't. Like, if it's something that my characters are never going to need to interact with in the course of the story, the reader probably doesn't need to know it either, even if you know it. As the author, that's a thing for you to keep in your little noggin, and hey, it'll be cool factoids for if you're ever like interviewed, or if a reader ever comes up to you and excitedly asks you for more details, you can be like, well, did you know this random cultural fact that didn't come up in the book and doesn't matter? And then your reader will leave all excited. Also, things like that could be put into newsletters or extra peripheral stuff. But back to the cultures and building them. On a fundamental level, one of the most important things to think about is, what does a culture love and value versus what do they fear and hate, and how strong are those emotions? Do they just sort of kind of not like those guys over there, or do they hate those guys over there? Or do they love those guys over there and wish those guys over there would be their friends? Hashtag those guys over there. So a lot of the things I've just said are like big things to take into consideration with your culture building. And you don't necessarily have to sit down and write all of this stuff out like before you start drafting, especially if you're a pantser. But these are things to think about as you are building your world, whether that is before or after you started drafting the book. But I've also written out a few small things that are culture building on the page that can help your world feel real and lived in, instead of just like a cookie cutter carbon copy of all of the other fantasy worlds or sci-fi worlds. So things to consider are things like fashion, makeup, and hairstyles. It can be really tempting to fall back into that same old of women wear pretty dresses and men wear pants and button-down shirts or whatever. Like, it's so easy to fall into the same thing as we have or have had in our world. But consider why in your world that would happen. If your characters live in a matriarchal society, would dresses have ever been a thing at all? Or maybe everybody wears skirts. There's things to think about. Also, obviously, what they wear every day versus what they wear for special occasions. Which brings me to food and holidays. And holidays ties in with the clothing and hairdos, but also with food. Food can be such an important way to build a culture and a believable society. Like, say you built up a desert culture, and suddenly you're giving them kinds of food that your reader is questioning how they obtained. Like, they're out here in the desert and they're growing, I don't know, watermelons. Something hard to grow in a desert. So then we wonder, like, what's the infrastructure for them growing this food? Now, obviously, you don't need to be the most accurate in the world. You don't need to become a plant expert and figure out only what they could conceivably grow in our world. But think about the foods that they're eating and how that would work in their environment, their society, and their culture. Again, what foods are they eating culturally? Is there a special fruit that they only eat on this certain holiday and everyone gets really excited about? Or do they make this special bread in service to their god or goddess? Again, tying back into religion. What do the poor people eat versus what the rich people eat? And finally, the last tidbit I wanted to bring up is language and dialects. I definitely recommend, especially if you're writing a fantasy book, that you have multiple languages at least mentioned within your story. You don't need to be a Tolkien and come up with whole new languages yourself. It can be as simple as they went to the new town and everyone was speaking blank language and the main character didn't understand what anyone was saying. Like, that kind of thing is okay. You don't even need to put the language on the page. If the main character doesn't understand it, then they're probably just sitting there thinking it sounds like gibberish anyway. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I have to come up with whole fantasy languages. No, you don't. You do not. If you really want to, you can, but don't panic and think that you have to. But remember that there are probably multiple languages and dialects within those languages in the cultures of your world. And dropping in little details like that, like she was speaking in the Ghibli language, I don't know where I came up with that word, but it was in the southern dialect. Like, yeah, is that necessary information? No, but it makes your world feel real. And it could even be used as a hint about something. Why is she speaking in the southern dialect? Isn't she from the north? Ooh, a clue. So culture can help your story. It's not just like a pointless thing that you throw in there as world building. It can be used to build and drive your story and your characters. So there you have it. Those were all of my notes for culture building. I hope that some of those tips were helpful to you, or at least got the gears turning and got you thinking about all of the various elements that could be in your various cultures. And like I said, you don't have to come up with everything right away, and you don't have to come up with every single culture in your world, but start with the base of your main character, their family, their home, and work outward from there. That's my advice. And really think about especially things like the environment and the religion as major factors when you start to build up that culture. I hope this was helpful, and if you can think of anything else that I needed to include, drop it down below. If you have already created a book and you're worried that maybe the cultures aren't working, aren't diverse enough, aren't doing what you want them to do, hey, hello, I happen to be a developmental editor, and that's one of the things that I can help you with in your story. If you would like to hire me, you can contact me over on Fiverr. Your first 5K words are only $25 to see if we would be a good fit. I am extremely thorough and have a pretty fast turnaround time, so check me out if you're interested. Otherwise, feel free to watch more videos here on the channel or check me out on my Patreon, where the patrons get content never seen here on the main channel. Also, I do have channel memberships for those same videos. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!
Happy New Year.
This month, it's just the warmest of hugs from me to my lovely patrons. Patrons in reverse order, like Lisa, Amanda, Jenny, Savvy, Scribbling Cat, Rennie, Jesper, Zaire, Shelby, Vampire Antihero, Callison, Anne-Sophie, Patrick, Belle, Light Julie, Hidden Glade, Kit, Merween, Sophia, Swamp Goblin Waifu, Deborah, Alyssa, Celia, Mufflier, KJ, Jessica, Caitlin, Robin, Jojo Bookish, Ronnie, Kirsten, Pudamancer, Mooney, Kira, Sam, Haley, Pansing Pony, Roma, 78 kilograms of shade, Kat, Sarah, Bird Anonymous, July, Martha Baggins, SB Boots, Laknunga, Tina, Gay Tutter, Jen, Annika, Kay, Scout, GK, Semi-Dark, Marshy, AJ, Lunar Muse, Jose, Lady Kragan, Cameron, Christina, Ria, Stephanie, Haley, Tactical Hot Dog, Nemo, and Bunny.
Thanks again, everyone, for making it through another year with yours truly. Hopefully there'll be all kinds of cool stuff coming up soon.